So hi there and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm just going to do a little editing video and I'm going to show you how I turn this image into this, or how I turn daytime into night for this lost stormtrooper out in the woodland. Okay, so we don't need to talk for too long, let's just get straight on with the editing. So the first thing to say is I took multiple shots of this image and I'm just going to quickly scroll through them. So as you can see, we've got one without the flame, and we've got several with the flame, and then we've got some that start to introduce some mist and atmosphere. So what I'll be doing is applying one set of edits to all of these images, and then I'll be taking them into Photoshop and applying some final tweaks and adjustments, layering them up just to merge all those misty, smoky layers as well as the flame that's on the match. So there we go, and that's the final image that we're going to see. So the first thing we need to do is select all of the images we want to edit. So I push down Shift and just click the left mouse button, and I'm going to turn syncing on. So now any changes I apply to the first image will apply to all of them. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to tweak my white balance a little bit, because I want this to have more of a blue feel to it. You know, because we're trying to go for a nighttime scene. So the first thing I want to do is adjust the white balance, because we want to have a bit more of a nighttime feel to it, so I want to give it more of that blue hint. So I'm going to adjust my temperature and just take it more into the blue spectrum, and I'm just going to raise my tint a little bit as well. There we go, so we've got almost a slight bluey, purpley tint, and as you just saw, all those changes have applied to all of those images that I've had selected. So I'm going to reduce my exposure. I'm going to take that down about one stop. There we go. And just going to add a little bit of contrast into there just to give it a little bit of punch. Then next, what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull down my highlights a little bit, just to make sure we don't blow out any highlights as we make the adjustment. And again, we don't get a lot of reflections at night, so that's sort of my thinking around this change. But what I do want to do is boost the detail that we get in the shadows, because I really don't want to lose too much of that detail in the wing of the TIE fighter. So I'm going to pull those up quite a long way, so let's say about 70. So for the whites, again, I'm going to drop them down, because I want it to give it that nighttime feel, so all the shadows and the highlights are slightly more subtle. And again, let's pull up the blacks to just recover some details out of the shadows. There we go, it's starting to look good. Now we've got some really nice textures in the moss, so I'm going to add a bit of extra texture into the image. And again, just to give a way of adding contrast is to just add some clarity. So I'm going to add some clarity in there, and maybe just a tiny bit of dehaze. That doesn't make a huge difference, but I may as well leave it as it is. Now, because it's going to be nighttime, let's drop down our vibrance. So I'm going to drop that down about 20. So I'm going to leave my saturation as it is, because I think that looks nice. So let's scroll down now to the next settings, which is the tone curve. Now, what I want to do is soften those blacks ever so slightly. So I'm going to raise these up, but we don't want to adjust the whole of this image. We really just want to affect the shadows. So I'm going to adjust my curve so it's much, so it only really affects the black end of the spectrum. So that's too much. There we go. So I think that's just given it it's almost like we've added mist into the image already, but we obviously haven't merged the layers yet. So I am going to do some colour adjustments, but I'm not going to do anything with the HSL sliders. I'm only going to adjust the image using colour grading. So what I want to do is sort of introduce some oranges and blues, because I want some oranges around where the flame is going to be, but I want blues in the shadows. So let's pull the shadows into the blue end of the spectrum. There we go, that's looking nice. And let's add some oranges into the mid-tones. So hopefully this will just add a bit of extra orange around where the flame is going to be. And again, on the highlights, we're going more into the orange and the red end of the spectrum. So you can see there, the Stormtrooper, we have affected the tones of the Stormtrooper here. So, and when we merge our layers, hopefully that's really going to bring out the oranges. So we'll leave the blending as is. And I'm not going to do anything with sharpening and noise reduction. I took this image at ISO 100, so there's a very low amount of noise in this image anyway. I'm not going to worry about lens corrections. I don't think there's any need to apply it for this image. But we do want to add a little bit of a vignette. So I am going to just add a bit of a vignette here. So let's drop it down to about 20. Cool, it's looking good. So the next thing we want to do, I think, is we want to start making this appear even more dramatic. So I'm going to use some gradient filters just to affect this image slightly more, just to make the shadows darker but not lose too much detail in the highlights. So let's pull this out here, and then I'm going to reduce my exposure even more, but I feel like we've lost too much definition on the TIE Fighter. So I'm going to pull up my highlights because I want to recover the detail in the highlights, and I'm also going to pull up my whites slightly. That doesn't make a huge difference, but I'll leave that as it is. And what I am going to do is use my range mask. I'm going to put that onto luminance, and then if I just adjust the range mask here, you can see we recover even more detail from the shadows, because effectively we're telling the mask not to affect the highlighted areas. So if I turn on my mask, you'll see as I pull that down, the mask adjusts to only include the darker areas and not the highlights. So I think around 80 is good for that. I think so, yeah, I think that's looking nice now. I'm just going to add one more up here because I want this to be a lot darker in the tree area. So I'm going to add another mask in just there. And let's have a look at the detail settings. So I think that's going down a bit too far. So let's just drop that down by 1. There we go, I think that's good. And again, highlights pulled up and the whites pulled up slightly. So yeah, I'm going to keep those settings as they are. And I'm not going to worry with a range mask on this one because I think that looks fine. So now let's just have a quick look at all of our other images and just take a look to see if we're happy with how they're looking. So here's the one we've been editing. And yeah, here are all our other ones. We've got some really nice orange tones in the flame, which is really nice. And we've really pushed back the background while keeping a lot of the detail in the foreground of the TIE Fighter and the Stormtrooper. So I'm pretty pleased with that. So the next thing I want to do is I want to pull these into Photoshop. So I'm going to make sure they're all selected. Then I'm going to right click them and go edit in Adobe Photo, open as layers in Photoshop. Okay, so perfect, we've got all the layers loaded into Photoshop. So let's have a quick scroll through. And there we go, they're all there. Now I'm going to just move my base layer to the bottom. So I've got my base layer at the bottom. So what I want to do is now select all of the other layers, and I'm going to change my blend mode to lighten. Now this will have basically pull out all the detail from the lighter areas of the image and blend them together with the darker, without affecting the darker areas particularly. So now as you can see, the flames have now blended together into a much bigger flame. The mist and the smoke has really sort of come out in the image, and I think that looks really good. But we do have a slight problem. As you can see, my image shifted ever so slightly when I must have knocked my Stormtrooper when I was adding my mist, and I've got a couple of Stormtroopers that don't line up. But this isn't going to be too much of a problem, but that doesn't matter too much, because what we can do, is just use a mask just to remove these Stormtroopers from the image. So let's add a mask. I'm pretty sure. So we want to make sure our brush is black. There we go, and I'm just going to brush out first Stormtrooper and just this log as well. And then I'm just going to copy that mask onto the next layers. There we go. So now we've fixed the Stormtrooper that, so it looks much better now. There's no more overlapping. And we haven't affected the rest of the image too much. We've still got that nice misty, smoky feel. Now, I do feel like this flame is ever so slightly too big. So again, what we can do is we can just take a little look at the layers and see if we want to turn any of these on or off, just to reduce the size of the flame. I think for this demonstration, let's just leave that one turned off. That's absolutely fine. So I think that's looking really nice now. So what I'm going to do, I want to make a few other little tweaks and adjustments on this image in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is select these layers like this, and then I'm going to just create a group of them. New group from layers. There we go. We'll call that original edit. And then what I'm going to do is duplicate this group so that I have a copy of it. And then I'm going to merge these layers together. So I'm going to merge my group, and now I have a flat version of this image. So what I want to do is, there's a couple of little bits that are frustrating me. So I had a light here, so I just want to take that out. So I'm going to use the spot healing tool just to fix a couple of these small areas that are frustrating me. So there's a few little marks on the windshield. I think would look better without. So there we go. The spot brush tool does a great job of just removing any dots you don't want into your image. I'm not going to spend ages doing it on this demonstration, just enough to give you the idea. Again, let's just get rid of this little highlighted area here, because I feel like there's no real need to have it. We want to keep the reflections of the trees in, because they look really good. But this light here, I want to get rid of this. So let's just brush that out, and then if you have any discrepancies, you can just keep spotting over it until you're happy that you've got a good image. And if you're not quite happy, you can always just use the clone tool just to brush in a little bit manually. There we go. That looks much better. So let's zoom out and take a look. Yep, so now as you can see, the reflection's gone out of this image. That's looking much nicer. So another thing that's annoying me is these knobbly bits on this tree. So I'm just going to use the spot healing tool, see if I can just get rid of them slightly. Yeah, that looks better. You could spend longer on this and do a slightly better job, but again, just as for demonstration purposes, just to show you how the spot healing tool works, I think that's done a really good job of just taking those distracting elements out of the scene. That's looking really good now. So we want to get this back into Lightroom, where we're just going to make our final 1 or 2 edits before this image is finished. So I'm going to save my image with Ctrl S. So when this is finished saving, you'll now see that this image appears back in the reel in Lightroom. So just wait for that saving symbol to finish, and then we'll pop back into Lightroom to make our final couple of adjustments. So perfect, our image is opened back up in Lightroom and is looking really nice. So just a couple of tweaks I'm going to apply to this just to finish the image off. First one is, I want to just knock back this TIE fighter a little bit more. I feel like it's just maybe slightly stronger than it needs to be. So I'm going to make sure I've got my, a radial filter on there, and I've got my mask set to invert, and what I'm going to do is just reduce my exposure on the TIE fighter a little bit. I'm going to reduce that by 1 stop. I think that looks nice now. No problems with that at all. I may just adjust my luminance mask a bit because I feel like we've lost some of the highlights a bit too much there. So I'm going to go down to my range mask. I'm going to turn on luminance and I'm going to adjust, pull it up here so that it doesn't affect so much of the image. There we go. So if we show you the mask overlay, you can see the areas that have got masked. And now what I'm going to do is add another radial filter around my Stormtrooper. Just rotate that round so we get more of the shape of him. So there we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm not going to have my mask inverted. And I don't need a range mask on this one. What I'm going to do again is drop my exposure. As you can see this time it's affecting the outside of the image rather than the inside. So I don't want to lose my highlights, so I'm just going to pull them up a bit. And if you wanted, you could adjust your colour temperature or the hue if you wanted to just make it a bit more. Oops, no, we don't want to do that. So that's looking good. And I might just add, I might just duplicate this, and I'm going to invert this one. And what I want to do is make sure, reset that back to 0. I just want to adjust my temperature slightly, just I want to make it more, ever so slightly more orange. So, oops, I want to go too. Just want those highlights on his helmet to come out ever so slightly more. There we go. And there you go. We've turned our TIE fighter image from daytime to nighttime and really pulled out that atmosphere and really brought the image to life by merging our layers together and accentuating the size of that flame. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. But that's it from me today. Take care and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.